WMI and CIM, using WMI commands to query data. Now, in the previous nugget, I told you that there were really two ways of getting at the repository, the old way, WMI, and the new way, CIM. This nugget's going to focus on the old way. Now, the old way works, XP 2003, heck, NT40. You can get this to work on in many cases. So this is good stuff for backward compatibility. It's pretty easy to use. So I'll show you some of the main approaches. Now, for right now, we're just going to focus on querying data, meaning reading data from the repository. We'll do things about making changes a little bit later. So here's how we'll get this done. I'll start by showing you how to use the WMI command to retrieve information from the repository. Keeping in mind, this uses remote procedure calls. This is a distributed component object model technology. It is old. It is not the way forward, but it's there for backward compatibility. And once you actually get the objects from the repository, they're just objects. I'm going to show you how you can work with them in PowerShell's pipeline, just like all the other objects you've been working with. I'll show you how to retrieve information from multiple computers and how to do so using alternate credentials. And there are some little tips and tricks about the values that show up inside a WMI object's properties. And so I'll give you some tips for working with those just to kind of get you past a couple of the worst speed bumps. Now for this set of demonstrations, I believe I'm going to stay entirely in PowerShell version 2 because everything you're going to see is the same in subsequent versions of Windows PowerShell. Keep in mind that what we're focusing on right now are the WMI commands. As I mentioned in the previous nugget, those are deprecated, which essentially means Microsoft can leave them in the product for as long as they want to. They're unlikely to actually go away, but Microsoft isn't going to invest any more money in improving these or adding features or anything else. So let's start with the basics. Now look, everything here presumes that you have already figured out what class you need to query and what namespace it lives in. That's the hard part of working with WMI, is actually getting that information, and there's no way to really make that easier, unfortunately. But once you know, get WMI object. It'd be helpful if I was typing in the actual PowerShell window. Get WMI object, give it a class name like Win32, I don't know, service. That's all you really need. Hit enter. Now, this is returning information on services, but it obviously is a slightly different layout than if you run get service. The neat thing here, let's do this. Let's pipe it, because every one of these WMI objects is an object, so we can pipe them. Let's pipe it to select object, grab all the properties from the first one. You can see you're actually getting better information from this than get service. Now, most of your WMI objects are going to include a number of different system properties. These are kind of useful. All of these start with a double underscore. So if you're going to use these, that's important. The first one is double server. That will actually give you the name of the machine that this came back from. Now, the cool thing here, check this out. Even if I query this using computer name, localhost, and then I hate how version 2 does that, property star first one. Even if I query it using an alias like localhost or an IP address, what I get back is always going to be the real NetBIOS computer name, which is very nice. This underscore path is also useful. This actually gives you a complete path to this specific instance. Now it's saying that the service name is AE lookup. Remember that I selected just the first service that came back using select object, and so that's what I'm looking at here. So this is a way that you can re-query this specific instance by using this path. So I don't want to say that the system properties aren't useful, because they are kind of useful. Now let's see what else have we got in here that's new. Start mode, that's not shown by get service. You've also got start name, shows you what user account this is running with, also not shown by get service. So there's some solid information in here. Dependency information, all that's in here. So look, at the end of the day, you're never going to see anybody type all that, right? It's likely that if they're doing select object, they're using the alias select, and they're using property as a positional parameter. Minus class, also positional. And most folks will use the alias GWMI. So exact same effect. Interesting enough, right? Let's see what else we can do. First of all, you can target this thing at multiple computers. Just to cut down on the screen output, I'm going to pick a different class now. And you know what? Actually, before I do this, hugely important thing to remember. Just as most PowerShell commands only display a small subset of their properties by default, so it is with WMI objects. Usually there's a very small default display property set. Pipe it to FL star, and you get a lot of information on some of these things. So it's, I think, really important that you remember that there's all this extra information. You don't assume that what pops up by default is the only thing that you've got to work with. All right, so let's fire this off at a computer. Let's see if my DC is responding. And what we're looking at now is the typical WMI timeout. And unfortunately, there's not really a strong way for you to adjust this. It takes a while for machines to decide they're just not going to work. In this case, my suspicion is that my domain controller's firewall is spun up. Oh, no, it wasn't. It just took it that long to respond to me. Well, that's awesome. We can give it multiple computer names. Let's see. I'm going to fire all my computers at it. Ooh, what a great trick. Oh, I don't have the AD computer command. I don't have the Active Directory commands on here. Let's do this instead, because I'm going to be querying a lot of these computers several times. Let's take all my computer names as a comma-separated list of strings. Out that to computers.txt. Get content computers.txt. Awesome. Get WMI object, Win32 BIOS, computer name, get content computers.txt. So parenthetical here. I'm going to run this command first. It's going to get all the computer names. They're simply strings, one per line. Those get fed to computer name, which accepts strings, and it's going to try and query from each of them. Now I'm doing this hoping that at least one of them will fail, because I want to show you what happens. First of all, we do have to sit through that however long it takes. It can take 45 seconds or so sometimes. When you run this command with multiple computer names, it's going to run them sequentially. Meaning if you give it 100 computers, it's going to go through the first one, then the second one, then the third one, and so on. If one of them fails, that's considered a non-terminating error, which means the command by default will try to skip that one. Well, it will skip it, and it will display an error message, and then it will go on to the next one. And I'm going to let this run for a second because that's exactly what I wanted to see, was that error. And I want to highlight a few things that are going on in this output that I think you just need to be aware of if you're going to be playing with this command like this. So let's give this a few more seconds to bomb out. What should it be on? It did DC, it did member, it did Win7, failed on member, so we're going after client, which is my Windows 8 computer. I'm thinking its firewall is full up. So this is probably going to fail, but it's got a timeout first. Oh, no, it got through too. Yeah, see, sometimes it just takes a while. So, you know, look, here's what I'm getting. You can see each of these has a slightly different serial number, so they are coming from different computers. Problem number one, none of this output, by default, includes the computer name. Now that I've let this be displayed, I don't have access to the computer name anymore. What I would have had to have done was use select object or one of the format commands. Let's use format table. And let's grab __ server, which is that system property that contains this computer name information. I don't really care about manufacturer. Let's do serial number and version. And we'll have it auto size. That 3 columns should be enough to fit all that on the screen. And we let it run again. Another big problem we've got is, look at this error message. Now, for the regular output, I didn't get the computer name because I didn't ask for it, and it doesn't display by default, which is somewhat annoying. But in the error message that occurs when you don't get a machine, you also don't get the actual machine name. It's not in there anywhere. So unless you knew what order you asked for the computers and you counted and you said, okay, DC was first, that must be DC. Member was second, that must be a member that failed. The default error message is not actually going to show you what broke. Another thing you're seeing right now is the fact that format table is not displaying information. Right, when I ran this command the first time, after a little bit I got this one, and then after a little bit I got this, and then this happened right away because it's the local machine, and then this took a little while to show up. Right now nothing's happening. And that's because when you auto size a table, format table has to hold everything in memory until it sees all the data, because auto size says I want you to size each column to hold its largest piece of data. So format table's got to wait until it sees all the data before it can figure out how big to make the columns, because I specified auto size. Now that it finally went through and I've got this lovely error stacked up in the middle of my output, look, there are cleaner ways to handle errors, and we are absolutely going to get to them. We're probably going to get to them in a little bit later. Error handling, I'm thinking, is nugget like number 58. So we've got a bit to get through, but we will talk about that. And it produced what I want, at least. I got the computer names. The error message still does not include the name of the computer that failed, so I guess it's just process of elimination there. Anyway, I need you to be aware of some of the little caveats around this thing. I want to hop over to Windows 8 and PowerShell 3 for just a skosh, because while all these commands work exactly the same, Win32 BIOS, same default output, they did something in version 3. Oh, what did we use before? Format table. Instead of instead of __ server, you can ask for PS computer name, and it gets you the exact same information. So it gets you the computer name that the result came from. If we pipe this to select or format list star, you'll see that PS computer name property, whereas it is actually, oops, we have to do this to get member if I want to show you this little detail. The PS computer name property is actually just an alias to __ server. So it's the exact same information. It's just a little bit more attractive in the output to see PS computer name than __ server, especially because the double underscore in a lot of the fonts the shell uses, it's hard for some folks to tell that's a double underscore. I'll see folks type it a lot with a single underscore, which obviously isn't right, so obviously won't work. So in version 3, they just added this PS computer name alias, so things could be a little more attractive. Now flipping back over to PowerShell version 2 again, let's see, get WMI object. One of the classes we looked at when we were exploring in the previous nugget was anti-spyware product. So let's try and query that, see what it looks like. By the way, I was going to say that the class names are case sensitive, but it says invalid class. And here's the trick. The root CIM v2 namespace is the default. And Win32 Service and Win32 BIOS, they both came from there. And if you are querying from that namespace, you don't have to specify a namespace. But if you aren't, if you're querying from a different namespace, then you have to specify the namespace. Otherwise, PowerShell just doesn't know where to look for that class. And there we go. So we get all those system properties, which always come along for the ride, but we get the display name. So let's now work on making that a little prettier. Let's format the table. Let's grab display name, product state, path to signed product exe. There we go. And we could auto size that to make it a little bit more attractive. So again, kind of the point here is that you can do all the things you've learned how to do with objects. You can format, you can select, you can filter. You could, if we hadn't done formatting, you could convert to HTML and probably output that to a file where it would be more useful. Once you get something from WMI, it's just objects. You can pipe it to get member. You can see what all the properties are. You can pipe it to select object. You can pipe it to a format command. It's just another object once it gets there. Another cool little trick you should know about. Oops. Let's do get WMI object class Win32 operating system. Let's go grab all my computers again. Get content computers.txt. Now let's say I had logged on to the shell or logged onto my computer as someone who didn't have permission to query this information from those remote computers. I'll show you in a second. The default permissions on the WMI repository, mean that anyone local on the machine can read information, but if you want to read information remotely, you need to be a member of that machine's local administrators group. So let's say I hadn't logged on as administrator. I can specify an alternate credential. Be prompted for the password, and then we can let this run. Now, when we ran this before, we got an error against my member computer, and both DC and client took a while. So let's see what happens this time. DC took a little bit of time, but it worked. Oh, okay, and they all just pop up. So we had two errors this time. This was member. It's the same one we got before. The RPC server is unavailable, probably because I suspect that the firewall's up on that computer. But look at this one. This is when it was trying to query the local computer. User credentials cannot be used for local connections. So there's a couple of things to take away from this. Thing number one is that whenever you specify a command like this and you give it a parameter, all of these parameters are used for every single one of the computers you query. There's no way to say, use this credential for the first computer, use a different one for the second one. Within a single command, everyone gets treated the same. And that's important because whenever you query something from the computer you are on, you are not allowed to specify alternate credentials. WMI just does not permit that. So this worked fine for DC. Member failed because of the firewall, I think. This is client, which is my Windows 8 computer. This was Win 7. That's my local computer, the one I'm sitting on right now. And it failed because I'm not allowed to use user credentials for connections to the local repository. So something else you have to keep track of, to keep in mind, or you're not going to understand why you got those error messages. Let's take a quick look at the help for get WMI object. Now, this is going to reveal some additional capabilities, some of which I plan to talk about in one of the next couple of nuggets, so we won't get into them too much right here. For example, we'll be talking about as job and how that works. If you are specifying alternate credentials, you can specify an alternate authentication mechanism. We obviously can specify one or more computer names. The little square brackets tell us that that's one or more. We can specify a namespace if it isn't going to be root CIM v2. You already learned that you can specify class, which is positional. So you tell it what class you want to query. You can really only query one class in a single command. So if you need to combine information from multiple classes into kind of a single unified output, stick around. That's going to be in one of our future nuggets. What else have we got in here that's fun? We'll play with throttle limit when we talk about jobs. We'll talk about the query parameter in a little bit. Yep, that looks like all the important stuff. Worth your time to read through this. Let me show you why. Let's just skip straight to the examples. There's a ton of them. Ton of examples. Lots of examples. Lots of different ways you can use this. 7 different commands to illustrate why. So make sure you're taking the time to read through that help. I'm not going to discuss every single capability of this command. There are some kind of edge case things that are in there that you might want to know about. So it's important that you take the time to read about them. Let's do one more thing before we move on. I want to kind of highlight that sometimes information that sits in the WMI repository is a little not obvious. Good example, get WMI object. Let's grab Win32 logical disk. Look at the drive type property there. 2, 3, 5. What's it mean? Well, there's no help file in PowerShell that's going to tell you. If you're looking at some of that information and you need to know, you're going to be up here. Win32 logical disk. And you're going to have to look. And you're going to have to jump into the class documentation, which is not that page. There we go. Scroll down to the property. Let's see, we said it was drive type. Here we go. It says 2 is a removable disk, 3 is a local disk, 5 is a compact disk, optical disk probably. So sometimes the information in here is not, immediately apparent. The other piece of information that's extremely not immediately apparent, let's grab Win32. In fact, let's put this in a variable because we're going to need to play with it. The Win32 operating system. Let's take a look at this. I want to pipe it to FL star so we can see all the data. So one of the better pieces of information that this class actually contains, in addition to version and architecture information, is the last boot up time. That is tough to read. Now, if you look at it, you can start to read it. Here's the year, the month, the day, and then we get into this thing, which is a serialized time with a time zone offset. Here's a little trick. Every one of the major core Windows management instrumentation classes comes with a free couple of conversion methods that PowerShell actually adds dynamically. That's why these are called script methods. So check this out. OS convert to date time, os.last boot up time. And it'll take that wacky thing and convert it to an actual system date time object. Now that means if you were to take that converted date time object and look at it in getMember, you get all of the properties and methods that we know go with a date time, which means I can take this and toShort date string. Oops. It's a method. Got to put the parentheses after it, or it's just going to say, yeah, that's a method. There we go. We can convert it to anything else. So another neat little trick. There's certainly a lot of WMI properties or things in the repository that have dates and times. They're all those wacky things. And this built-in convert to date time method, so you need to retrieve a WMI object, stick it in a variable, use its convert date time method, and then give that the date or time property you want converted. And that goes in the parentheses. So just to show you that again, that's the basic usage. So another very, very useful little trick. That should help you get through most of the weird data value type issues, I think. So I've shown you how to use the getWMIObject command and its alias, gwmi, to retrieve information from the repository using the WMI technique. Keep in mind, this communicates with RPCs, which is a DCOM technology. This is old. This is not the way forward. However, once you get that information out of the repository, they're just objects. You can select them, export them, convert them, format them, whatever you want to do with them, you can do with them. I showed you how to do that from multiple computers and how to provide alternate credentials for that connection. Unless it's the local computer, you cannot provide credentials for the local computer. And I showed you some tips for working with the property values that come out of that repository. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.